Donald Trump just witnessed a scene that was once unimaginable, federal marshals initiating the actual physical process of seizing his vast real estate holdings. And the judge presiding over this catastrophe didn't just turn down Trump's legal excuses, she absolutely obliterated them. In a ruling that legal scholars are describing as a blistering, historic takedown of a former commander-in-chief, the court systematically dismantled every single defense he had left. What set off this financial doomsday scenario? It started when Trump's own legal team filed desperate emergency motions, arguing that taking his assets was unconstitutional, that the fraud verdict was nothing more than a political hit job, and that forcing him to pay up would inflict permanent damage on his global business empire. The judge's reply was devastatingly simple. She labeled his arguments frivolous, completely void of legal merit, and frankly, an insult to the court's integrity. We aren't just talking about a real estate tycoon losing a few investment properties here and there. We are witnessing the methodical deconstruction of the Trump Organization's most prized possessions, the crown jewels. These are the very buildings that have defined the Manhattan skyline and sculpted Trump's public persona for decades. Now they are being cataloged, appraised, and prepped for the auction block to satisfy a colossal civil fraud judgment. When you see federal authorities preparing padlocks for Trump Tower and moving trucks idling outside 40 Wall Street, the abstract concept of legal accountability suddenly becomes very, very real. It is genuinely shocking to realize we are watching an empire built over 50 years, brandished as the ultimate proof of his genius, potentially disintegrate simply because he could not stop lying about the value of his assets. If you enjoy deep dives into the stories shaping our world, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button so we can keep bringing you this content. Let's get you up to speed on exactly how we got here. The root of this entire disaster is the massive civil fraud case brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James against Trump, his adult sons, and the entire Trump Organization. For years, James dug into allegations that Trump was running a two-faced accounting scheme, systematically inflating the value of his properties to get better loans and insurance rates, while simultaneously deflating those exact same values to lower his tax bills. And we aren't dealing with rounding errors. The investigation revealed that Trump claimed his penthouse was nearly 3 times its actual square footage, and he slapped a price tag of over $500 million on Mar-a-Lago, despite it being worth a mere fraction of that amount. He was playing fast and loose with appraisals across his entire portfolio. The case finally went to trial in late 2023, and Judge Engoron ruled that Trump had committed persistent, repeated fraud over the course of decades. By February 2024, the gavel came down with a judgment exceeding $450 million, counting interest, effectively ordering Trump to cough up the profits he made through these fraudulent schemes. Naturally, Trump appealed immediately, but here is where he hit a massive wall. Under New York law, if you want to pause the enforcement of a judgment while you fight it in appeals court, you have to post a bond that covers the full amount plus interest. In plain English, Trump needed to produce roughly $500 million in cash or secured assets just to stop the seizure process from starting. According to reporting from Politico in March 2024, Trump's lawyers admitted they went to over 30 surety companies trying to get a bond. They couldn't find a single one willing to underwrite a bond of that magnitude using Trump's real estate as collateral. Why? Because the fraud case itself proved that Trump's property valuations were fantasy. No serious financial institution was willing to gamble on assets that might be worth far less than Trump claimed. Before we move on, let's be brutally honest about what this means. Asset seizures are not things that happen to former presidents. They don't happen to billionaires who actually possess the liquidity they brag about. These things happen when a defendant has run out of options, when the courts have ruled they owe a fortune, and when they either cannot or will not pay up. The fact that we have arrived at this juncture reveals the stark difference between Trump's actual financial health and the mirage he spent decades curating. Here is where the situation becomes truly unprecedented. According to multiple news sources, including legal reporters at CBS News and CNN, the seizure mechanism kicked into high gear this week. New York State attorneys, flanked by federal marshals and receivers appointed by the court, began physically arriving at Trump properties armed with court orders. At 40 Wall Street, a historic skyscraper that Trump has always touted as a trophy asset, officials were spotted entering the premises with the documentation needed to inventory the building's assets and establish control. Up at Seven Springs, his massive estate in Westchester, court-hired appraisers were given access to conduct formal valuations. Even at Trump Tower, the gaudy golden fortress on Fifth Avenue that has been the symbol of the Trump brand since the early 80s, legal officials walked through the doors to determine how the building could be liquidated or transferred to pay off the debt. Trump's legal team threw everything they had at the wall to stop this. They filed emergency motions claiming that seizing these properties would cause irreparable harm, not just to Trump, but to the tenants, the businesses inside, and the employees working there. They recycled the argument that this entire process was politically motivated, that Letitia James ran for office on a promise to get Trump and was now executing a political vendetta. They even argued that enforcing the judgment before the appeal was finished was a violation of Trump's due process rights. NBC News reported that Trump's lawyers tried to paint a picture of total chaos, suggesting that forced sales would crash property values, hurt innocent bystanders, and amount to an unconstitutional government taking. The judge, however, was not buying a single word of it. In a written ruling issued this week, one that analysts are calling absolutely devastating, Judge Engoron took every single one of Trump's arguments and dismantled them piece by piece. CNN legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin reviewed the full opinion and noted that the judge's language was shockingly blunt for a judicial document. She pointed out that Trump was found liable for fraud after a long trial where he had every opportunity to defend himself. She emphasized that this judgment wasn't a surprise attack. It was the predictable result of conduct the court had already determined was persistent, egregious, and calculated. The judge specifically called out the claim of irreparable harm, noting that any harm here was entirely self-inflicted. If Trump didn't want his assets seized, the solution was simple. Don't commit fraud, or alternatively, post the required bond. His inability to find a company to back his bond wasn't the court's problem to solve, but the ruling got even sharper. The judge addressed the political motivation argument head-on. She wrote that Trump's insinuation that the entire New York justice system, from the AG to the courts, was part of a coordinated political persecution was not only backed by zero evidence, but it was also deeply insulting to the integrity of the judicial process. She noted that Trump received every procedural protection available, that the evidence of fraud was overwhelming, and that pretending this was about politics rather than the law was exactly the kind of bad faith argument the court had come to expect from his team. An MSNBC legal correspondent noted that the judge essentially accused Trump of trying to weaponize the appeals process using motions not to find justice, but to delay accountability forever. This is a good moment to remind you that if you're finding this analysis helpful, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on this ruling, and don't forget to share this video with others. This behavior isn't new. It's part of a pattern we've seen repeatedly: delay, deny, and deflect whenever serious consequences loom. Trump has fought every step of the way, claimed persecution, and refused to accept authority in almost every legal battle he's faced. Just look at the classified documents case. For months, he insisted the documents were his personal property, that he declassified them with his mind, and that the National Archives had no right to them. He fought the subpoena, ignored court orders, and practically forced the FBI to execute a search warrant. Even after the indictment, he cried witch hunt and claimed former presidents could keep whatever they wanted. It wasn't until criminal charges and the threat of prison appeared that his story shifted from "I did nothing wrong" to "maybe it wasn't technically legal, but everyone does it." Then consider his reaction to the January 6th investigations. Trump claimed executive privilege shielded him from testifying, even though he was out of office. He sued to stop the National Archives from handing documents to the House committee. He told witnesses to ignore subpoenas. When charges came down, he pivoted to arguing that presidential immunity covered everything he did, no matter how illegal. The strategy is always identical: delay, appeal, call the process illegitimate, and hope for a lucky break before the consequences hit. And we can't forget the E. Jean Carroll defamation cases. After a jury found him liable and ordered him to pay millions, Trump immediately went back on social media and defamed her all over again, triggering a second lawsuit and another massive judgment. When ordered to post bond for that appeal, he fought it, calling it excessive and unfair. It's the same cycle. Commit the act, deny it happened, attack the victim, lose in court, cry persecution, refuse to pay, and drag out the procedural fight. Even in his days as a private businessman, Trump was infamous for this. Contractors would finish a job on his buildings, submit their invoices, and get stiffed or offered pennies on the dollar. If they sued, Trump's army of lawyers would drag the case out for years, burying the small business in legal fees until they gave up. The goal was always to make fighting him more expensive than surrendering. But now Trump is up against government prosecutors and attorneys general who have unlimited resources. The old strategy of bleeding the opponent dry doesn't work here. He is finding out what it feels like when the other side cannot be bullied into submission. So what exactly was in this ruling that has legal experts so stunned? Let's break down the three key sections where the judge demolished Trump's defense. First, she tackled the irreparable harm argument. Trump's team said selling assets before the appeal was decided would cause damage that couldn't be fixed if he eventually won. The judge countered that the bond requirement exists specifically to balance that risk. If Trump really believed his appeal was a winner, he could protect his assets by posting the bond. The fact that he failed to do so wasn't evidence that the system is unfair. It was evidence that the financial institutions, companies that assess risk for a living, didn't believe his assets were worth what he claimed, or they didn't think his appeal would succeed. The judge highlighted a profound irony here. Trump was liable for fraud because he overvalued assets to banks. Now he claims those assets are so valuable that losing them is a tragedy. Yet when he tried to use them to get a bond, no bank would accept his valuations. The judge essentially said his inability to get a bond was the free market confirming the fraud verdict. The second section destroyed his due process claims. His lawyers argued that enforcing judgment before the appeal finished was unconstitutional. The judge pointed out that the bond requirement is actually what protects due process. Trump can appeal all he wants. The bond just ensures that if he loses, the money is actually there to pay the victim. Without it, he could strip the assets during the appeal and leave the court with nothing to collect. The judge noted this is standard procedure, and Trump was getting the exact due process everyone else gets, nothing less, but certainly nothing more. The third section went after the political motivation claims. This is where the language got incredibly sharp. The judge wrote that Trump's habit of crying political persecution every time he faces accountability has become tiresome and is beneath the dignity of the court. She noted the AG brought the case based on hard evidence. Trump had a full trial. He cross-examined witnesses, and the findings were based on facts, not politics. To suggest otherwise, she wrote, is an attempt to undermine public trust in the justice system, and courts have a duty to forcefully reject that kind of rhetoric. This leaves Trump's legal team in a nightmare scenario. They have to keep appealing the fraud judgment, but that appeal is happening while the assets are being seized. Every day without a bond is a day where properties are evaluated, liens are filed, and sales are prepped. Alternatively, they could try to find the money, but that means finding a bank to trust his collateral, which the market has already refused to do, or coming up with $500 million in cash, which he clearly doesn't have. They have hit a dead end. They tried appellate courts for emergency relief and got denied. They asked for stays and got denied. They argued the Constitution and lost. Eventually, you run out of arguments and face the reality. A court found you liable, you owe the money, and if you don't pay, they take your stuff. That isn't persecution. That is literally how civil law works. Andrew Weissmann, the former FBI general counsel and a veteran of high-stakes prosecutions, went on MSNBC and framed this perfectly. He said, "This is the moment when Trump's entire persona as a brilliant businessman and billionaire collides with legal reality. For decades, Trump used claims of immense wealth to get loans and build a political identity. Now, a court has ruled that much of it was fake, and the bond market's refusal to back him confirms the court's findings. This is the unmasking of his core identity. Eli Honig, a former federal prosecutor, added that the judge's tone was significant. Judges usually bend over backwards to sound neutral. For a judge to use such pointed language, calling arguments bad faith and insulting, indicates a rare level of frustration. It suggests the court sees Trump not as a litigant seeking justice, but as someone manipulating the system. Even Jonathan Turley, a law professor who often defends Trump and testified for Republicans during impeachment, admitted on Fox News that the ruling was legally sound. He acknowledged that while he understands Trump's political grievances, the legal arguments about bonds and seizures just didn't hold water. New York's rules are established and apply to everyone. Trump wanted special treatment, and the court was right to say no. Let's break down the consequences, because this is bigger than just a legal drama. First, the financial impact is immediate. If 40 Wall Street or parts of Trump Tower are sold off, Trump loses core pieces of his brand. But beyond that, financial analysts tell Bloomberg that this could trigger a domino effect. Many of his properties carry debt. If his top-tier buildings are seized, lenders on other properties might declare him in default and demand immediate repayment. A few seized buildings could spiral into a total collapse of the organization as creditors scramble to get their money out. Then there is the political fallout. Trump's entire pitch is that he is the ultimate deal maker. Watching his properties get repossessed because he can't pay a fraud judgment shatters that narrative. It is one thing to say the system is rigged. It is another to have your assets taken because banks don't believe they are worth what you say. That isn't politics. That's the market calling you a fraud. Opponents will use this. The image of Marshals at Trump Tower is devastating. It confirms the criticism that his business genius is all smoke and mirrors. While his base might stay loyal, swing voters might look at the seizures and decide that where there is smoke, there is fire. Institutionally, this case proves that even former presidents are subject to the same laws as the rest of us. If you commit fraud, you pay. If you can't bond, you lose assets. There is no carve-out for VIPs. Legal scholars tell the New York Times this will be a landmark example of how to handle powerful defendants who try to weaponize the process. The judge's refusal to tolerate bad faith arguments might encourage other judges to stop letting powerful people turn courtrooms into political theaters. Inside MAGA world, this is causing chaos. Supporters are split. One faction, led by voices like Steve Bannon, is treating this as war, urging Trump to refuse cooperation and calling for supporters to physically block seizures at Trump Tower. Another faction of Republicans is quietly terrified. They worry that Trump's inability to get a bond reveals deep financial rot, damaging the party's brand. A third group is trying to walk a tightrope, saying the judgment is unfair, but admitting Trump should have settled long ago. Trump himself is ranting on Truth Social in all caps, attacking the judge and the AG, trying to spin his personal financial failure as a political battle. But facts are stubborn things. It's hard to claim persecution when the reason you are losing assets is simply that you can't find a private company to trust your finances. Democrats, interestingly, are staying quiet. Strategists believe the visuals of property seizures are powerful enough on their own. Spiking the football might help Trump's victim narrative, so they are letting the reality of the situation do the talking. This comes down to a fundamental question. Can our system hold powerful people accountable? If Trump could commit fraud for decades, run for president on that lie, and then dodge the consequences by screaming witch hunt, it would send a terrible message. It would tell every fraudster that if you get loud enough and powerful enough, the rules don't apply. This case proves the opposite. No one is above the law. If you can't post bond because the market doesn't trust you, that is the verdict on your honesty. So here's the bottom line. Donald Trump is watching federal marshals seize his properties to pay for a massive fraud judgment. The judge has destroyed his legal defenses, calling them insulting and baseless. This is the dismantling of his identity as a successful businessman, proving that the market agrees with the court. The numbers were fake. When you can't use your own assets to get a bond because banks don't trust your valuations, you aren't a political martyr. You are facing the consequences of your own actions. If he manages to escape this, it means the rule of law is broken. But for now, the seizures are happening, the appeals are struggling, and the sight of Trump Tower potentially changing hands is going to shake the 2024 election in ways we can only imagine. The stakes are maximum, and the bill has finally come due. If you want to stay updated on every twist in this historic case, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Thanks for watching.